A border security bill proposed in Congress but not voted on. So what's next?
We all have the same goal, which is to secure our border so that we can keep our communities safe and our country safe. And so we got to have the dialogue, we got to have that strategy, we got to make sure we have the resources.
We'll also take a look at two types of border fencing found here in Arizona.
They need roads going through here, they need a wall, they need towers, sensors, and they could secure the international boundary if they really wanted to.
From the U.S.-Mexico border, this is Arizona Week. Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Lorraine Rivera.
And I'm Christopher Conover.
We're standing along the U.S.-Mexico border. We're just south of Arivaca and west of Nogales.
This week, the U.S. House was supposed to vote on a new border security bill. The vote was put off. But before that vote, a congressional delegation went to Bisbee to see the border firsthand. I was there and have this story. This is the international border. For those of us who live here in southern Arizona, it's just part of life. But for those who live in, say, the northeast of the United States, it's something they only read about and can imagine. Now imagine if you were a member of Congress and part of your job was to legislate this border, but you'd never seen it. That was the purpose of today's trip.
21 members of the U.S. House Homeland Security Committee bounced along border roads in a bus, getting a first-hand look at the line in the desert where the U.S. and Mexico meet. Congresswoman Martha McSally led the tour. The group met with border ranchers, one of whom, John Ladd, hosted a news conference for the group. He's optimistic Congress understands life along the border a bit better.
It's been said from the chairman that this is the biggest delegation that's come, and that's a fact. It's also, we have the widest representation of border ranchers. We have from Nogales to the New Mexico state line. The meeting that we've had all day has been way more productive than I thought. The delegation is, they're good people. I think we all have the same interests at heart, and they have an understanding now of what the reality of the international boundary and the border area is. And I'm very optimistic that after today, with the things that's been learned, that there might be something very positive coming.
6 of the 21-member congressional delegation said they'd not been to the border before the tour.
When we're in Washington and we're talking about these issues and we're hearing different opinions and the debate goes on, it certainly helps us to be here talking with the ranchers, being the voice for the ranchers, being the voice of our Border Patrol, and actually seeing what's happening here, seeing what will work, seeing what won't work. It's hard to debate an issue when you actually haven't been there and seen that. So this has been incredibly educational for me. And I think that I am going to continue to encourage my fellow colleagues to come to the border and see what's happening, see what's working, see what isn't working.
We actually drove to where the most recent drive-through was, and there was a breach in the pretty hardcore parts of the barrier where they drove through just a week ago and onto the Ladd Ranch. So they see that firsthand, and they hear firsthand the concerns and the fears that the border residents have because of the dangers of illegal activity.
The Arizona border is different than the Texas or the California border. McSally says she hopes that was driven home by the tour.
It's easy to look at a graph and see, oh, it looks like the Tucson sector, the number of apprehensions is going down, so things are getting better. And I wanted to make sure that they saw, as I mentioned, the numbers may be going down, but the danger level of the individuals coming is going up. And so I don't want them to think, oh, now we need to focus on Texas because Arizona's still got a public safety problem.
The delegation was made up of 19 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
I think that the concept of the border is very different than the reality of the border. So it's been a good experience for them to meet with ranchers who live and work right in the border, and then actually to see the border, see what a fence can do, but also what a fence can't do.
We're here on the Chilton Ranch in southern Arizona. The family's been working this land for decades.
I spoke with rancher Jim Chilton, and here's that interview.
At the beginning, we wouldn't have bought this ranch if we knew what was coming. But in the 90s and the early 2000s, I estimated, based on arrest records 100 miles in the Tucson area, that 30 or 40,000 people were coming through my ranch every year. And they were mainly just good people wanting to get to Los Angeles or Phoenix to work, and women, kids, and they were nice, they were respectful. We always offered water when we saw them, and I've put out 29 drinking fountains on water troughs on my ranch, so people can get a drink if they need it.
Does the illegal traffic, does that create a problem for cattle ranching out here? I mean, we're talking about cut fence line?
Yes, the international boundary here is cut all the time, and my cattle get into Mexico, and the cattle from Mexico get into my ranch. And one of our bigger problems is that people drop trash, about 8.5 pounds per person, the Border Patrol tells us. And in that trash is often plastic bags. And some of our cows will eat the plastic bag, and then they die a slow, miserable, horrible death. So we lose maybe $20,000 a year worth of cattle. And it's really hard to see a cow with her bowel system all stuffed up and on her way to die.
What do you think Washington needs to know about what's going on in this portion of the desert?
Well, this portion of the desert is open. Here's the international boundary. There aren't any Border Patrol until you get 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 miles inside the United States. So this is a no man's land. And so immigrants, and particularly druggers, have free passage coming through here. And even terrorists could come through. It's a national security problem, as well as a drug problem, as well as an environmental problem, because they drop trash all across our ranch.
Has the fence line, the Normandy barriers, has that helped you at all?
Yes. Of the 5.5 miles of international border on our ranch, 1/8 of a mile is those Normandy barriers. The illegal druggers mainly used to come across these mountains back here in their vehicles and drive clear in 15, 20 miles before they were apprehended. When I found that they were coming through, I talked to the Border Patrol, and they came out and put the Normandy barriers in, and that stopped that type of traffic.
You've been out here long enough, and I think monitoring the situation on the border has really become another part of your work out here along the border. So what do you think will work? You talk about the infrastructure that's north of the border, but you have some ideas for what could work on the international fence.
Yes. We are now 2.5 hours from the Nogales station. So it takes 2.5 hours for them to come around to this point. And these hills over here are in the Tucson station. It takes 3 hours for them to come out to Tucson to get here. They really need a forward operation base. I've offered the Border Patrol 10 acres with corrals and water for $1 a year to have a forward operation base out here. And they need roads going through here, they need a wall, they need towers, sensors, and they could secure the international boundary if they really wanted to.
When you're out here, you're typically armed. Why is that?
Well, you're always armed, because if we called 911, well, we can't call 911 here. You're on your own. And I have found if you have a gun, they leave you alone. I've had as many as 17 obvious druggers facing me, and I had the gun, and they were worried.
Oftentimes in the press, we see the fortified fence, but then we come out here, and here we have 4 strands of barbed wire. You think most people know that this is the international border?
No. The media portrays the fence on almost all of their demonstrations of the border. Why? Because it's easy to drive up to the fence by Nogales. The fence only comes out 2 miles from Nogales, then it's 25 miles to the next fence. So Secretary Napolitano can say, oh, the cities are safer than they've ever been. Yeah, why? Because the druggers walk around the fence. They come through here. They don't go and crawl over that huge fence.
Congress was tabling a bill that they thought might work, the Secure Our Borders First Act, calling for more infrastructure. Do you think that's what this program needs to really solve the problem?
Yes, we were talking with Martha McSally, myself and other ranchers and my wife, and 5 days after she was sworn in as a member of Congress, and border ranchers all along complain that the defense in depth strategy that the Border Patrol has, coming out halfway from Tucson and trying to arrest people there, apprehend people, is wrong. It won't work. Hasn't worked for 25 years. Why would they expect it to work in the future? What they need is forward operation bases next to the international boundary and being out here. There are 650 agents in the Tucson station, 24 miles that they're responsible for securing of the international border. That's 27 people per mile. I mean, they could, if it wasn't for the policy of defense in depth.
This is a little frustrating for you, but what kind of keeps you out here and what makes you say, this is just part of my lifestyle on the border now?
Well, this is beautiful country and we love it. We love our horses, cattle, our house, our ranch. We love everything except being the path of the cartel drug routes. And we're going to stay. Many of our neighbors have sold out and gone, left. But we're staying. If the cartels want to bump me off, they can. I'm not leaving. We have a family cemetery. I'm either going to be under the ground or on top of the ground. I'm not leaving.
The proposed bill calls for more fencing like this one. It's known as the Normandy style.
The bill also calls for repairing existing fence. You can see these patches here. This one was done in May of '09. Now, Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson doesn't like this bill. He says it will hinder what the Border Patrol does. He met with ranchers this week and then went to Phoenix to speak with journalism students.
We also have to remember in Washington that what we do has real impact on the lives of people directly affected by this kind of stuff. So yesterday, I had my second visit with ranchers here in Arizona who live on the border, who, frankly, care less about this macro view and are concerned about what's happening on the border where they live. And so it's important for, I believe, public servants like myself to not only have this perspective, but to also hear from people who are directly affected by our policies and what is happening on the ground every day, and try to be influenced by both these levels of what's going on. It's never that reassuring to somebody who lives on the border, who is every day dealing with migrants crossing their property or whatever, to know, well, 15 years ago was much worse. Doesn't that make you feel better?
Congressman Rick McCall of Texas is the sponsor of the border security bill. He spent time last weekend on the border and was not surprised that the secretary does not like the proposal before Congress, nor does he care.
We gave the department time to get this done. They have not gotten the job done. And I believe it's time for Congress to lead. The reason they don't like my bill and the unions don't like it is because we tell them how to get it done. It's the first time we go sector by sector telling them what technology, sensor surveillance, aviation, whatever we think is needed based on the threat and the needs, based upon our discussions with the ranchers, with Border Patrol chiefs, with the stakeholders. We're telling them how to get the job done, and maybe they don't like that. The threats are real. Y'all know that. The drug cartels, drug traffickers, the drugs that poison our kids, and the potential terrorist threat that we see that could potentially cross over into the United States. So it's about protecting this nation. It's a national security issue.
Johnson has a plan of his own for the southwest border. He calls it a risk-based strategy.
You focus your resources on where you see the activity is going on through a lot of sophisticated surveillance capability versus just simply building an entire wall across 2,300 miles. First of all, you cannot build a wall along the Rio Grande Valley, along the Rio Grande. It's impossible. Second, you're talking about very remote areas. Even ranchers will tell you, building a fence, a wall, along a lot of mountainous area is not the answer. More technology, more resources.
When it comes to fencing, there is some controversy. Environmental groups don't like the big fencing like most people see at the border. They like this Normandy-style fencing.
And one of those groups is the Sierra Club. Here's Dan Millis, one of the group's leaders. A wide range of wildlife exists along the U.S.-Mexico border. Dan Millis of the Sierra Club says in the 29 miles between the Huachuca Mountains southeast to Douglas, the San Pedro River is the only place where wildlife can freely cross the border.
We have seen ocelot, we've seen jaguar here. If a large mammal comes upon this wall, unless it's a monkey, there's no way it's getting over it. I mean, it's just, you can't get through this. There are smaller holes in the wall where there are low water crossings. Small animals can get through. But anything wider than 4 inches, out of luck. And that's a big deal. I mean, imagine cutting our whole country in half and not letting anybody pass. Or imagine cutting your house in half and putting up a wall in the middle of your house. Now you can't get to the bathroom. Now you can't get to the refrigerator. What are you going to eat? It's a similar situation for a lot of these mammals and other animals. They get blocked by this wall when they're trying to migrate.
This Sierra Club video provides one example of a snake trying to navigate the fence.
Imagine you're a lizard. Imagine you're this big and you come upon this tightly woven mesh and you can't get your head through there. You can't get through it. And to you, this quarter mile, half mile of wall between us and the next low water crossing where you got 4-inch gaps, that takes you all day to walk. And so that's a big deal in terms of habitat being fragmented. So it's not necessarily only the species that need to roam miles and miles and do that every year to migrate. A lot of species live here and they've had their habitat cut in two, or they've had their habitat disturbed, destroyed, and it now sits underneath this wall or this road next to the wall. And it's not only a concern for wildlife, it's a concern for archaeological sites, historic sites. There are quite a few archaeological sites and graves that are underneath this road where we're standing right now.
And the Sierra Club says it doesn't end there.
It's not just the wall that concerns us. These roads that they build next to the walls are huge. They can be 50, 60, 100 feet wide. And oftentimes they're poorly maintained dirt roads. They drag old tires around on the roads to smooth them out, and that just obliterates the soil and turns these things into giant pallets of dust that just blow up into our air. And it's going to be really hard to try to help the vegetation recover here if we're ever able to do that. It just takes vegetation a long time to recover when the soil has been blasted like it has here on this road.
Millis said their research shows animals are less likely to cross fences like this one, but not necessarily people.
We spent a lot of money building this thing and implementing it, and if it's not working, that's a big deal for us as Americans. Another reason that we should care about the wildlife is that it's worth $1.4 billion per year to Arizona's economy. And that's folks coming to see wildlife, watch the birds, and enjoy the beautiful outdoors that we have here. So it's a big deal for all Arizonans, not just folks that live here on the border.
The San Pedro River is said to provide one ecosystem and one riparian area, making for a fertile habitat.
all of the wildlife that depend on this area depend on it being intact and being in good shape. And they depend on us being good stewards of the land. So when we waive laws that protect this area and just build walls right through it, that has a number of impacts, and it affects the whole ecosystem. If we really want to secure the border, we need to address the root causes. Why are so many people crossing the border? And the best way to address that cause is through comprehensive immigration reform. We need a just path to citizenship for the people that are already in this country illegally, and we need a way for people who want to come to this country to work or to study or to reunite with family, any of those legitimate purposes. We got to let them in the front door, because you know, Border Patrol should be chasing the drug smugglers and whatnot out here, but instead they're chasing moms and dads. They're chasing down workers who just want to work in the fields or already have a job in the U.S. And it's inhumane, and it's causing a lot of damage to our environment. So we need to address immigration reform, and we need to support sending countries. So sustainable development in countries like Mexico and countries in Central America, those programs are very important. We should support those programs, because if we can raise the standard of living just a little bit for folks who feel so hopeless that they're coming across the border, we can really make a difference.
Owning a home or a ranch along the border is an evolving lifestyle.
This is a cattle ranching family. Here's my interview with Sue, Jim's wife.
20 years ago, all of the ranchers here readily gave food and water to people who came across. Most of those people were persons who were looking for work. And often they were families with children, and they were headed north. The nature of the traffic coming across has totally changed, and now it's risky to be giving anything to these people. You have to be quite careful. Some are Salvadoran gang folks. Some are escapees either from Guatemalan, Mexican, or other nations' law enforcement. Some are felons, persons charged with felonies in the United States, and it's not easy to distinguish. It's rare now that you find a child or a young person. Mostly they are teenage, high teens, low 20s, capable of carrying the drugs, which are the major commerce between Mexico, south here, the Sinaloa cartel, and right through where we are standing. This is a major drug route. It is no longer a major work seeker route.
Do you feel safe?
It's an excellent question, and I don't give it a lot of thought. We lock our doors, we lock our vehicles. We didn't do that previously. We are generally armed when we're out in the country. However, I don't kid myself that my little pistol is a match for the AK-47s I've seen on the shoulders of some of the folks I've observed.
Would more fencing, more fortified fencing as opposed to this 4-strand barbed wire make you feel a little bit better out here at your home?
Definitely. The problem is not just the lack of a fence. The lack of a fence is step one. Step two, you have to be at the fence. You cannot defend a border where you are not present. So the Border Patrol needs to be stationed at forward operating bases along the actual line. 20 miles north of here is where they currently are. When we have visitors to our church and our community who come to learn about the issues here, we tell them, you see that paved road you just drove in on, the Aravaca Road? That is the U.S. international boundary, de facto. De jure, it's down here. De facto, it's way north of here. That means that there are square miles in which these folks from the Sinaloa cartel can operate. This is linear miles that you're standing by at this fence. That's much easier to defend than square miles of rugged canyon terrain. The present choice, it's a political choice to consider that the border is not at the boundary. The border is defined by those who have a responsibility for it as some area that may go as far as 100 miles into the United States. That leaves residents of the actual boundary area in a no man's land that's effectively been ceded to control of the Sinaloa cartel. Cartel scouts are on the mountains you can see around here. They guide the drug traffic through the canyons, evading any few scattered Border Patrol vehicles that might happen down the roads here. We have a policy which totally permits this to happen. It is not an accident. The Border Patrol knows it. The government knows it. The state government knows it. The federal government knows it. The state government has tried to take some action, has tried to request better interdiction at the border. They do not have it.
All right, the buzz on the border now, a little not traditional for us to be out here, but here we are. And Christopher, we should note it took us an hour and a half to get to the Chilton Ranch from Tucson, another hour and a half down here to the international fence. And this is exactly what we're talking about.
This is exactly what we're talking about. If you look here, these are called Normandy barriers in border parlance, but it just comes up and meets the 4-strand barbed wire fence. And this is what that bill in Congress is talking about. They want to put more fencing in, be it Normandy barriers or some of the taller fence that we saw earlier in the show that most people think of. I also want to point out for the folks watching that that hour and a half from the ranch to here, it wasn't paved roads. It was 4-wheel drive, and then we had to walk about a half mile to get to the international border.
Now, this week Congress did not vote on the bill. Will we see resolution sometime soon? Because there's no timeline at this point.
They did not reschedule a vote. The problem is there are a few in Congress who are concerned that this bill moves so many Border Patrol assets to the border that interior enforcement further away from the border gets lost. There's a bill working through the Judiciary Committee in the House that is addressing that, but the opponents, and maybe the opponent is too strong a word, those with concerns want to see that bill before the border bill comes up. So everything is slowing down. It could get worked out over the weekend. You know, stranger things have happened, but things have slowed down a bit.
All right, Christopher Conover, and I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thank you so much for joining us. This was your edition of Arizona Week. We'll look for you again next week.